2 years of covering every bill in our house, and I found out what my husband actually thought of me through a group chat he forgot to close on the kitchen counter. So I opened my own bank account. And then I left. My name is Marisol, and this story begins on a Tuesday night in November, 5 days before I walked out of the home we had shared in Mississauga for 6 years. Have you ever poured everything you had into someone you loved? Your savings, your sleep, your career, your sense of who you were, only to find out they were laughing about it with their friends? I never thought that would happen to me. I thought I knew my husband. I thought knowing someone was enough to protect you. We had been married for 6 years when the accident happened. Before that, my husband was a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm out in Brampton. He was the kind of man who had a plan for everything. A 5-year financial roadmap pinned to the inside of our closet door, color-coded savings goals, a retirement projection he updated every January 1st like clockwork. I used to tease him about it. I'd say he treated our life like a project bid. He'd laugh and say someone had to. Back then I found that reassuring. The accident happened on a job site in the summer of 2022. A scaffold gave way on a second-floor frame. He fell about 3 meters and landed badly on his left side. 2 herniated discs, significant nerve compression, a prognosis the physiotherapist described as highly individual. He wasn't paralyzed, he wasn't going to be in a wheelchair. But the pain was real, the limitations were real, and for the first several months, so was his gratitude. I am an HR coordinator at a logistics and distribution company, with offices off Hurontario Street. I was earning $68,000 a year when this all started. We had a semi-detached house with a variable rate mortgage that had already crept up to $2,400 a month. His employment insurance covered a portion of our costs through the winter, but EI has a ceiling, and when it ran out, the math fell entirely to me. I told myself it would be temporary. I said those words so often they lost their meaning. I rearranged my entire life to carry us both. I started picking up extra hours during our company's busy shipping season, January through March, when I had no business staying past 6, but I stayed until 8 anyway because the overtime helped. I declined the professional development opportunity my manager recommended, a week-long HR leadership conference in Ottawa, because I didn't feel right leaving my husband alone for 5 consecutive nights. When the HR director position opened up internally, a role that came with a $14,000 salary increase and a title I had been quietly working towards since my 2nd year at the company, I thanked my manager for thinking of me and asked her to consider someone else. I told her the timing wasn't right for our family. She looked at me in a way that I understood only later. She was watching me make myself smaller and she knew it. At home, the division of responsibility had become invisible to everyone except me. Every morning before I left for the office, I made sure my husband had what he needed for the day, his medications sorted into the right compartments of the weekly organizer, his breakfast prepared, his afternoon physiotherapy reminders set on his phone. I drove him to his appointments at the clinic on Burnhamthorpe twice a week and sat in the waiting room with my laptop open, trying to squeeze an extra hour of work into the hour I was sitting there anyway. Afterward, I stopped at the Shoppers Drug Mart on the way home to fill whatever prescription had come due. I handled the mortgage payments, the property tax installments, the utility accounts, the car insurance renewals. I managed the ongoing paperwork with the insurance company when they delayed his disability top-up, a process that required 4 separate phone calls, 2 resubmissions of the same medical documentation, and a formal letter of appeal that I drafted myself at midnight on a Thursday. I tracked our grocery budget, did the weekly run at the Fortinos on Saturday mornings, and planned our meals around what was on sale and what his doctor had recommended he avoid. I paid the bills online every 2 weeks in a sitting that took about 40 minutes, a task my husband had handled before the accident and had not returned to since. He thanked me at the beginning. I want to be clear about that. In those early months, after a particularly hard night when the pain kept him awake and I'd been up beside him, he would reach for my hand in the dark and say he didn't know what he would do without me. I held on to those moments. I kept them in a part of myself I returned to whenever things felt heavy. But somewhere across the 2nd year, the thank yous stopped. Not all at once. It was more like the volume on a radio being turned down so slowly you don't realize the room has gone silent until you strain to hear something and there's nothing there. He stopped commenting on meals. He stopped acknowledging the appointments I'd arranged. If I was 15 minutes late getting home from work, I'd get a text asking when dinner would be ready. Not asking where I was, not checking if I was all right, but asking about dinner. Once, when I mentioned at the end of a very long week that I was exhausted down to something I couldn't name, he looked at me for a moment and then turned back to the television. He didn't say anything. I went to bed and lay awake for an hour staring at the ceiling. His physiotherapy results had been improving steadily since early spring. His doctor had cleared him for desk work and light physical activity in April. He had the go-ahead to begin applying for roles, project coordination, estimating, anything in his field that didn't require him to be on site. But the job search, from what I could observe, consisted mainly of a LinkedIn profile he hadn't updated since before the accident, and occasional mentions of a role he'd looked at and decided wasn't quite the right fit. I didn't push. I told myself he needed time to rebuild his confidence, that finding your footing after something like this was its own invisible labor. I believed in the version of him I had married. I kept believing in it long past the point where the evidence suggested I should. I want to tell you about the Tuesday night that changed everything. It was nearly 11. My husband had gone to bed early. I was still at the kitchen table working through a policy update that needed to go out before 8 the next morning. There was a bowl of leftover pasta beside my laptop that I'd barely touched, and a cup of tea I'd made at 9 that had gone completely cold. The kitchen light was the only one on in the house. He had left his phone on the counter when he went upstairs. I wasn't paying it any attention. Then it lit up with a notification. A message in a group chat. I could see a fragment of the preview text from where I was sitting, just a few words, but they stopped my hands above the keyboard. I should not have picked it up, I know that. I've thought about it many times since, but I did. The chat had about 6 members, friends he'd known since his early years in construction. The message that had just come in was from one of them, asking how things were going at home these days, and the reply my husband had already sent, an hour before he came to bed beside me, was there waiting to be read. Still the same. Marisol keeps the lights on. Honestly, I call her my bank machine. She doesn't know that, obviously. She'll keep covering everything while I figure out my next move. She's too stubborn to quit anything, including this marriage. I read it 3 times, then I scrolled up. The conversation went back weeks. My husband talked about our life with a casual confidence that slowly hollowed me out from the inside. He described my job as something that happened to benefit him. He joked about how I managed everything without complaint. At one point, one of his friends had asked, it seemed like a genuine question, whether he planned to go back to work anytime soon. My husband's response, why rush it? She's not going anywhere. I've got time to be selective. I set the phone back down exactly where I had found it. I walked to the bathroom and ran the cold tap and stood at the sink for a full minute. Then I went back to the kitchen table, sat down in the same chair, and finished the policy update. I sent it at 20 past 11. Then I closed my laptop and sat in the kitchen by myself, listening to the refrigerator, until the house felt still enough to go to bed. I did not cry that night. I did not go upstairs and wake him. I didn't argue with the walls or draft an angry text I wouldn't send. I just sat there while something inside me finished settling. For 2 years I had been asking myself how to fix our marriage. That night, I stopped asking that question. I started asking a different one entirely. The next morning I got up at the usual time and made coffee. I packed my lunch, I kissed my husband on the forehead on my way out. He stirred but didn't wake, and I drove to the office in the early gray light of a November Wednesday. I said nothing. I gave no sign. At lunch, I stepped outside to the parking structure and called a family law firm in Mississauga that I had found during a quiet 10 minutes at my desk that morning. The receptionist was calm and unhurried. She booked me in for a Thursday afternoon consultation. I said thank you and went back inside. After work, I stopped at the RBC branch on my way home and opened a personal checking account in my name only. I had always kept my own credit history. That much of myself I had never surrendered. But our joint account had become the center of our financial life together, and I needed something that was only mine. The whole process took 25 minutes. I drove the rest of the way home feeling clearer than I had in a year. That evening I sent my manager an email. I told her I had been reconsidering the director opportunity and asked whether the position had moved forward with another candidate. I was nearly certain it had. She replied before 9. She said she was genuinely glad to hear from me. She said the department had kept the role open. Could we speak first thing Thursday morning? I said yes. For the next 4 days, I moved quietly through our shared life. I made dinner. I drove my husband to his Friday appointment and waited in the usual chair in the usual waiting room. I answered his texts when he needed something. I kept the routine going exactly as it always had. He had no reason to see anything differently. But in the hours he couldn't see, I was building something. The consultation with the family lawyer on Thursday afternoon was clarifying in a way I hadn't quite anticipated. She didn't steer me toward any particular outcome. She laid out my options under Ontario family law clearly and without drama. What a separation agreement would look like, how the equity in the house would be handled, what I was entitled to, given that I had been the sole income earner for nearly 2 years. She gave me a list of documents to gather: tax returns, mortgage statements, account records, insurance correspondence. I had almost all of them in a filing cabinet in our spare bedroom, organized by year. That's the kind of person I've always been. On Thursday evening, after the consultation, I met with my manager and formally accepted the director position. She shook my hand across her desk and told me the department had been waiting for me to be ready. I thanked her. I meant it more than she probably knew. On Friday night, I looked up rental listings in Etobicoke. A university friend lived near Islington, and the commute to my office was manageable, 40 minutes on a bad day. There was a one-bedroom unit available in a low-rise building on a quiet street. Clean, good southern light, within my budget if I was careful. I sent an inquiry. I heard back Saturday morning. I arranged to see it Sunday afternoon, the 2 hours my husband usually spent in front of football. I told him I had errands. He nodded and didn't look up. The apartment was modest and exactly right. A south-facing window filled the living room with pale November light. The kitchen had enough counter space. There was no noise from the street. The building manager showed me around and answered my questions patiently. When she asked I was hoping to move in, I said the following weekend if that was possible. She said that worked. I signed the lease that Sunday at her small table near the lobby, with a pen I had brought in my bag. On Saturday morning of the following week, I woke before my alarm. I made breakfast, 2 eggs toast, a pot of coffee. I set 2 cups on the table. When my husband came downstairs, I was already seated. He poured his coffee and sat across from me, the same way he had on 1,000 ordinary mornings. He didn't notice anything different. I slid his phone across the table toward him. Beside it I placed a single printed page, a screenshot of the group chat, printed at the office the previous Wednesday. No note, no annotation, just the words. He looked at the phone, he looked at the page, he looked at me. For a long moment, the furnace running below us was the only sound in the house. Marisol, he started. I'm not angry, I said, and that was the truth. The anger had moved through me and left on its own schedule, somewhere in the middle of that first night. What was left was something quieter and much more certain. But I need you to understand what I've been carrying. Not just the mortgage and the bills. The appointments, the prescription pickups, the insurance resubmissions, the planning, the calendar, the quiet worrying that starts before I open my eyes in the morning. All of it. Every day. While you told your friends, I was your bank machine. He opened his mouth. I gave up a promotion for you, I continued. I turned down a conference that would have changed where I am in my career. I gave up nights, weekends, hours of sleep. Things I haven't fully accounted for yet because I haven't had enough distance. I did all of it because I thought we were partners. I paused. A partner isn't a backup plan. A wife is not a bank machine. He looked at the page again. Something moved through his face that I won't try to describe more precisely than that. I've found a place, I said. I've already signed the lease. I have a moving truck booked for this afternoon. The truck is just for my things. I'm not taking anything shared. I've spoken with a lawyer and her office will be in touch to begin the formal process. The joint account has enough to cover the mortgage for the next 8 weeks. After that, we'll need to reach an arrangement through our lawyers. He looked up. You're serious? I've been serious since the night I read that chat. He set his coffee down. He looked at the table between us. I didn't mean it the way it reads. I know what you meant, I said. That's what took me the longest to sit with. You weren't having a hard moment and venting to a friend. You were describing our life like it was a situation you were managing. That's not something I can come back from. He didn't argue. I hadn't expected that. Maybe he had known, somewhere, that this day existed I'm sure in the future and had simply chosen not to look at it. Or maybe seeing his own words on a printed page made every possible counter-argument fall away before he could reach for it. I finished my coffee. I rinsed the mug and set it in the drying rack. I picked up my bag. The physiotherapy clinic has your complete file, I said from the hallway. There's a note on the pad beside the microwave with a contact at Dr. Singh's office for employment transition support. She works with people in your situation and she's very good. The EI reapplication forms are in the filing cabinet, blue folder, second drawer. Car insurance is paid through December. The property tax next installment is the 15th. He hadn't moved from the table. I didn't say anything else. There was a version of this scene where I offered something softer at the end. Something that would have made it easier to watch me go. But I had spent 2 years giving things that went unnoticed. And I was done performing grace for an empty room. I had said what I needed to say. I had made sure he would be all right. That was already more than he had counted on. I opened the front door and walked out into the cold. The first weeks in the Etobicoke apartment were quiet in a way that felt entirely different from the silence I had been living with. This quiet had room in it. It had edges I could locate. My husband called several times. I answered twice, briefly. He asked if we could talk. I told him our lawyers were the right channel for now. He said that wasn't what he meant. I said I understood, but it was what I needed. He didn't push further. My closest friend came over on a Saturday with groceries and spent the afternoon helping me organize the kitchen shelves and hang the curtains in the bedroom. She didn't offer any version of I told you so, which I had been quietly bracing for. Instead, partway through the afternoon, she looked at me across the living room and said I looked like myself again. I didn't know how to answer that for a moment. Then I realized what she meant. I had forgotten that there was a self to look like. The director position came with a salary adjustment that changed my monthly picture considerably. I could cover the Etobicoke rent without strain. I contributed to my RRSP for the first time in 26 months. I signed up for a Wednesday evening yoga class 3 blocks from the building, the kind of small ordinary thing I had been telling myself I'd get to for years. I went to the class every Wednesday. I kept going. About 4 months after I left, my husband asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed. We sat in a Tim Hortons on Dundas Street, neutral ground, halfway between us. He looked tired in a way that was different from before, not the tiredness of someone who isn't doing enough, but the tiredness of someone who has recently started doing more than they expected. He told me he had taken on contract work, project coordination, smaller scale than what he'd had before, but steady. He had started seeing a therapist. He said it was helping him understand some things he hadn't wanted to look at. I listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he said, I think I built a story in my head where I was the one who was struggling and you were just the stable part of the equation. I stopped thinking of you as someone who was also struggling. I stopped thinking of you as a person who had given things up. He paused. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for what I wrote. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it in a way that's actually true. It was the most honest thing he had said to me in 2 years, possibly longer. I believe you mean it, I told him, and I accept that apology, genuinely. He looked up at me with something in his face that I recognized as hope. But I can't go back to a marriage where I lost myself trying to keep it standing, I said, as gently as I knew how to say it. Not because I'm still angry, because I spent too long not knowing who I was outside of what I could do for you. I'm just starting to figure that out again. I need to keep going. We finished our coffees. We said goodbye without much ceremony. I drove back across the city in the early evening light, west along the Gardiner, the lake flat and pewter gray to my left, the city beginning to light its windows against the November dark. I thought about the woman who had been sitting at a kitchen table at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, finishing a policy document with cold tea at her elbow, not knowing yet what her life was about to become. I thought about how long she had been carrying things that went unseen, and how she had kept going anyway, and how quietly and completely she had eventually decided that she was worth more than that. She was right. You are allowed to expect to be seen. You are allowed to expect that the care you give with your whole heart will not become a joke someone else tells. Kindness is not an obligation. A wife is a partner, and you are not anyone's backup plan. If you were in my place, what would you have done? I'd really like to know. Leave a comment below, and thank you for staying with me through this.